West Virginia versus Cincinnati, part 2, but this time it could be an elimination game.
You are Locked On West Virginia, your daily podcast on the West Virginia Mountaineers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, guys? Welcome back in. My name is Mountaineer Paul. I am your host, and this is Locked On West Virginia. Thank you guys for being here. It's an amazing Wednesday. Anytime we have the Mountaineers coming on, you know it is a good day as long as they win, right? Going to bring somebody on to talk hoops today because this game comes on at 7 tonight. I thought, well, there's enough time in between now and then to do it, at least to get a preview out there. So I'm going to bring in on a guy who used to be a Locked On host and has now moved on to other ventures. Alex Frank, man. What is up, brother?
Mountaineer Paul, it's great to be with you. We got a big game tonight, Bearcats, West Virginia. I'm so happy this rivalry is back now that we're both in the Big 12. This was a great rivalry when we were both in the Big East. And I tell you, tonight's game, as it shows in the rundown, this feels like an elimination game, especially for Cincinnati. And you know it's a big game when you've got Rich Hollenberg and Fran Fraschilla in the house tonight at West Virginia. So going to be a fun night, and want to welcome all of our listeners and your listeners to our live stream. So we got a pretty big day ahead of us, Paul.
Very big day. And I'll tell you what, man, the game in Cincinnati, we had the Jerry West jerseys on. We had our mojo flowing. If you'd have told me that West Virginia team that was 15-7 would be 15-10, now I would probably not believe you. These teams have gone opposite directions, literally. Both have, West Virginia was 15-7, now they're 15-10. Cincinnati was 12-10, now they're 15-10. And it's been because of Jizzle James. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong at all. When you look at the way Jizzle James has been playing, he has just been putting this team on his back. And he's been the energizer. He's been lighting it up from three-point range. Jizzle James is finally becoming the guy that a lot of us envisioned when he committed to Cincinnati back in October of 2022. And you're seeing him set the tone on both ends of the floor. He's become an elite scorer. He's the only scorer, by the way, on Cincinnati to be in the top 25 in the Big 12 in scoring right now. So Jizzle James is literally carrying this team through the last 4 games. And you mentioned it, Paul, the fact that both of these teams have gone in opposite directions. Like I was looking at West Virginia going into today's game, and they've lost 3 of their last 4 games, but they've all been by close margins. Like they've been right there. And to see on Saturday that West Virginia loses to Baylor in overtime, and Baylor scores all 9 points in overtime at the free throw line. Like that's just, that's just a tough way to lose a game that was right there for the taking. But Cincinnati, they went on the road. They beat Central Florida scoring 93. They beat BYU, which anyone that wants to question the legitimacy of that win, I would refer them to last night when they crushed the Jayhawks by 34. And then you beat a Utah team that's been fighting, scrapping. They just beat Kansas the other night. So the Bearcats have played their way back into at least consideration, at least close to the bubble, but they got to start stacking wins. They got to start winning big games. They got to start winning games consistently. They were in the game Saturday against Iowa State. They just couldn't close it out. Iowa State proved to be too big on the glass. And now you go face a West Virginia team that, the last time that these two teams played,
it looked like a bad matchup for you guys. That's the takeaway I had. I said, well, we're just a bad matchup for them. That's what I felt like.
You want that game, the last time that we played you guys, which was 17 days ago, February 2nd.
Right.
It was there was a lot of apathy amongst the Bearcats fan base after the game, and Jizzle James struggled in that game. But ever since then, he has been on a tear. Jizzle James in his last 4 games has been it's not like he's been scoring like just 20 points. Like he has in his last 4 games. He had 24 against BYU and then 25 in each of his last 2 games. He had 6 assists against Utah, and then from 3-point range, He was 6 for 8 against BYU. He was 2 for 5 against Utah and 5 for 9 against Iowa State. So that is 13 threes in his last 3 games on 22 attempts. That's over 50%. It's close. That's right around 60%. So he is really starting to make that impact that we're seeing. And when you see a high-priced recruit like Jizzle James, and Paul, you know this, having seen Cincinnati before when they were in the Big East, like they've always had that one great player. It goes all the way back to you can go all the way back to Kenyon Martin, and then it was Steve Logan, and then it was Eric Hicks, and then it was Sean Kilpatrick, and then it was Gary Clark, and then it was Jaron Cumberland, and they haven't really had that guy since. Jizzle James may be, that guy come next year, assuming he stays, and the year after that, that's like, that Bearcats player that epitomizes toughness, elite scorer, great shooter. And he's going to have to show up tonight against West Virginia because, Paul, as you see on your rundown, Javon Small, who I have an absolutely tremendous amount of respect for, he has become one of, if not the best players in the Big 12. Is that too far-fetched to say, Paul?
Not at all. Fran Pachola actually put out a post yesterday. He spoke with some of the 35 GMs that were in the house and basically said that, man, they're drooling over Javon Small right now. The way he's putting up numbers, the way he's carrying West Virginia. Joe Lunardi, because of our resume, still has us in the tournament. And speaking about Jizzle James, I got to say, he's going to draw the Sincere Harris assignment again, who locks people up. He's taken Chucky Hepburn out of the game. He's taken Ryan Nembhard out of the game. He's taken several really good players out of the game over the course of this year. Probably the most unheralded weapon on this West Virginia team, which is why we have a top 20 defense in so many different categories. If we can just get a secondary score to Javon Small, most of the time, we're in good shape. But unfortunately, it seems like here over the last few games, it has just been a little bit short. And that's why that's kind of why I titled this game an elimination game for both teams, because I wanted to look at this really quick before we move on to the next segment. So looking at West Virginia after this game versus Cincinnati, if you're talking about must-win games, this is absolutely what you would consider a must-win game, right? And moving forward, obviously West Virginia has Texas Tech on the road. Well, that's going to be really hard. Although West Virginia's beaten great teams on the road this year, then you get TCU, winnable game. BYU looks really good right now, so that's scary. Utah and then UCF. You've got 3 games remaining at home starting today. You got to hold serve at home and pray that you get 1 or 2 on the road. If West Virginia gets to 18 wins, they're in. I don't know about Cincinnati. Their resume isn't as good as the Mountaineers, but remaining on the schedule, obviously, is this West Virginia game, a very beatable TCU team, a Baylor team that's evenly matched. Then you've got Houston, which is almost for sure a loss, just for anybody. Then you've got Kansas State, who can be very good at times, and then Oklahoma State. But I would say that Cincinnati has a very good chance to get to that 18-win margin as well. The only game you look at over there on here and say that's a loss is Houston, secondary to that Baylor. Outside of that, really nothing. And it looks like you guys could reach possibly even 19 wins. So, would that be enough for Cincinnati?
So if they're at 19 wins, that puts them at 9-11 in Big 12 play, which isn't bad. It'd be, 2 games under 500, essentially just 1 win short of 500 because 20 games in the Big 12. I'm not totally sure that would get them in without having to win the Big 12 tournament, but as long as this team doesn't fall flat in the Big 12 tournament, let's say they win a game or 2, get to Thursday, maybe get to Friday, I think that could be enough to get them into the tournament, probably looking at a first 4 game in Dayton, which, hey, for Cincinnati fans, wouldn't be a far travel at all on either Tuesday or Wednesday night. I would say, Paul, the 10-10, because then you'd be 20-11, 20 wins. I think just seeing that number through some of the lens of the committee members, I think that would at least have them teetering to the right side of the bubble. And if they win a couple games in the Big 12 tournament, if they get to Thursday, because I think chances are they're going to have to play on Tuesday, the Big 12 tournament, because seeds 9 through 16, as you know, in the Big 12 now with 16 teams, are going to have to play on Wednesday. But if they can get to Thursday in the quarterfinals, preferably Friday, in the semifinals. I think this team can still find a way into the tournament. Their schedule, it does offer them a lot of opportunities. A lot of fans and media personalities that I work with and interact with on Twitter were mentioning after the Iowa State game that, yeah, it was a frustrating loss. They wanted to complain about the officiating. I'm not going to go down that route. I never do. A lot of people said, hey, if they show that kind of effort, 4-2 or 5-1 down the stretch is certainly feasible. You mentioned TCU on Saturday. That's a game they should win. They beat TCU last year at home, and then they play Baylor. The Bearcats are a much better team now than they were when they went to face Baylor back in early January when they lost by 20. Houston, as you mentioned, look,
It's a
nobody's
loss.
beating them.
It's a
No
loss.
one's beating them. No one's
I
beating
mean,
them.
you could shock them, but on the road
Sure.
at Houston,
Oh,
it would be, you can win some money that night.
you're walking into a hornet's nest.
You are, for sure. They're the best team.
I mean,
They're the best team in the country, in my opinion.
You think so?
Outside of Auburn, probably.
That's fair. I think and Auburn beat Houston earlier this year. Interestingly,
It was yeah.
So, Houston. I mean, look, house money essentially.
Right.
Kansas State. You mentioned they can be good at times, and they were against Cincinnati back in the first game of Big 12 play, the Monday before New Year's. That was a weird game. Coleman Hawkins was really good that night, and then Oklahoma State. That's a game you should win on a Saturday at 3:00.
It's one of those games you should win, but you could lose. You never know.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we've lost a lot of games. I'm not saying we, because I went to Cincinnati and I'm a Bearcats fan. As you see, the Bearcats have, they can beat. It's like they've lost games they should have won, and then they've won games where you felt like they could have lost. So I mean, but isn't that the Big 12 in a nutshell right there?
That's the Big 12 in a nutshell. Absolutely, it is.
Well.
Got to get to break really quick, guys. We are at 11. So let's go to break. I'll bring Alex right back on, and we'll be right back to talk Jizzle versus Javon. This is going to be a dynamic backcourt matchup. Who's going to win out? We'll talk about that next, right here on Locked On West Virginia. And this episode of Locked On West Virginia is brought to you by TurboTax, of course. This is a message from sponsor TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any of the money back. Well, now Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the money back, the most money back, and that's guaranteed. While you go about your day, no stressing, worrying, or waiting, this is Taxes Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteeing details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. And I am back with Alex Frankie Frank in segment 2. We crack our dew as always. Let me get that drink.
It's 5:00 somewhere, Paul.
Well, yeah. Yep. I always crack a dew in segment 2. It rhymes. It gives me a chance to drink something. That's what I always say.
That.
Yeah, most people do. It's actually become a really big pop. We are squad shows with everybody. I think you may remember squad. Do you remember squad shows when you were at Locked On Bearcats?
I don't know if we had those.
Okay, well, it's where everybody gets together.
Man, I must have left then right before that was a part of Locked On, because like when I listen to Locked On NFL, I hear them advertising for Locked On NFL squad. So
yeah. It's really funny, man. And like, so we've kind of started making fun of me in the Locked On or in the segment 2 crack-a-doo, like just different things that I say.
Segment 2 crack-a-doo.
Yeah. And segment 3, sometimes I don't have a do, so it'll be a Dr. P, right? So just whatever.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's always the West Virginia tie-in. I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew, that whole thing.
What's segment 1? Like, is there something that rhymes with one? Like, does something that roll off the tongue?
Yeah, so for segment 1, I've thought of a few different things, and none of them's really worked out. And because segment 1 is like the cold open, the opening of the show, I felt like that would interrupt especially something like that YouTube specifically. You know what I mean? So
Okay.
I try to leave that a little more free flowing, and I've got my drink right before the show starts. A lot of it really is mouth dryness, so just goofball, me being a goofball, basically. At the end of the day,
Well,
it's a way for me to inject a little humor into the show
I
too.
get the Mountain Dew Mountaineers, so some things
There is
just all make sense sometimes.
absolutely, and obviously, I mean, if I fall out on camera, let's say I send you my address beforehand, you tell the ambulance what my blood type is, please, because
I
it is
will.
Mountain Dew. In this game, obviously, Javon Small, Jizzle James, two really cool names that start with a J.
Mm-hmm.
Both guys really caring for their teams right now. As a matter of fact, you could make an argument that right now, maybe the two most carrying players for their specific team in the Big 12. You mentioned already what Mr. James has had to do for the Bearcats. Well, Javon Small is no different. Without Javon Small, West Virginia doesn't go into Kansas and beat them for the first time in 33 years in a home opener. That's just an incredible stat, by the way. Something that only happens once every 33 years or in the 30 once in a 33-year span is incredible. And without Javon Small, that doesn't happen. West Virginia doesn't beat Arizona or Iowa State or Gonzaga without a guy like Javon Small. We all know the resume of the Mountaineers, which is why we spoke earlier. West Virginia gets the 18. They're not in. They're solidly in because of that resume. And thankfully so, because the second half of this stretch has been pretty bad for us. And luckily, we've got the first half of our schedule to carry. Javon Small wins basketball games he has clutched. And the matchup with Jizzle James is fascinating on several fronts. They did guard each other at times as well in the first game. So I'm wondering if it's going to be a strategic thing with DeVries to try to make sure that that doesn't happen in this game, because they're going to need both players to play well. And being on both ends of the court is just not conducive to great offense. Listen, Javon's really good at it. He does a great effort on defense, but man, he's gotten tired in a few games because of that. Which is why Sincere Harris, in my opinion, the best on-ball defender in the league, and he really causes a lot of havoc for us. I think he was a big reason that you guys struggled in the first game. We'll see what happens in this one.
I think one of the similarities between Jizzle and Javon is that they've had to carry their teams because there's not a whole lot of production around them. Both the Bearcats and the Mountaineers, Paul, and I think you'll agree with me on this, they struggle from three-point range. For the Bearcats, Simas Lukosius has not been the three-point shooter that a lot of us thought he could be this season.
Right.
Connor Hickman, a transfer from Bradley, who was a really
we
good
wanted him.
Yeah, I mean, you saw what he was able to do when the Bearcats played him and Bradley in the NIT last year, and he was supposed to be that three-point shooter off the bench. Well, he's been hurt, and I don't know if he's going to come back this season. Dede Thomas has been kind of up and down. He's been better.
He was good against us.
Games. Yeah, he was. He was the only good player against you guys. He had 10 points, and no one else.
I think Lukosius was okay against us, if I remember. Maybe I'm wrong.
If we go back to that game, which was on February 2nd, so Dede Thomas, as you mentioned, had 10 points. He was 2 of 5 from 3. Dylan Mitchell had 6 points, 10 rebounds. Lukosius had 8 points, 1 of 7 from the floor, 1 of 4 from 3. So
he got his points at the line, wasn't it?
Yeah. 5 of 6. Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
By the way, the Bearcats were 11 of 12 from the free throw line. They were just 31.3% from 3 and 31.5% from the field overall. So, yeah. I mean, hey, if we could have just shot free throws the whole game, maybe it would have been different. But I think what's interesting, and I was looking at West Virginia, and I think you'll agree with me on this, like, aside from Javon Small, like, who is a shooter, maybe besides Joseph Yusufu, who has been really good of late, who's a player that can be a concern for the Bearcats from three-point range? Like,
definitely Jonathan Powell. Yeah, Jonathan Powell was
Ohio native.
Yeah, obviously a top 40 player. Flipped him from crosstown rival Cincinnati, Xavier. At the last minute, and we're glad to have him. He's had huge games for us this year at times. He's had games where he's hit 4 or 5 threes and has made a major impact. He's a traditional at this point in his career as a true freshman, a 3-and-D player. He's really big, got a big wingspan, he got a beautiful shot. He was right around 35% there for a while, and it's dropped. I think as a true freshman, it's sometimes hard when you're the second. Like they've needed him to be the secondary scorer in multiple games this year, and so I think there's been a lot of attention given to him. He doesn't have a lot of dribble drive to his game right now, and I think he can get it. He's got the athleticism too. It's just something he's going to have to work on. And so when he figures it out, he's going to be a really tough guard. But for now, he's 3-and-D. Toby Oconee, if you look at what he's done over the last 3 games, you can argue he's right there with Javon Small as a very important player on our team. Against Baylor, he had 19 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists. Awesome game. And you go back to against BYU, I think he had a great game that day too. Against BYU, he had 16 points and 5 rebounds. So he's hot now. And I think, if he can stay that way, I think we'll be fine down the stretch. We've lost these really close games, like you said. And they have been, I'll be honest, against BYU were the worst home whistles I've ever seen. I don't get on here and complain about the refs all the time. There have been a couple games this year where I have, and I'll admit that. But the one against BYU was truly, I've never seen something that we had 2 guys in that game get knocked out of the air onto the floor so hard that I was worried they were out for the year. Like it was that bad.
Wow.
It was like you ever seen how it looks when somebody gets power bombed? Like it was that hard.
Yeah.
It was serious. Like Javon Small was probably 9 feet in the air and fell straight onto his back. Like, if you go watch it back, it's like, how did he get up from that? And it was Kip Kissinger, of course, and if you go back even to the Cincinnati days with Bob Huggins, I think they had run-ins. And look, at the end of the day, we lost the close game, and it wasn't really all because of the refs, but I mean, it's great for me to talk about on the show. But if we're getting down to brass tacks, West Virginia it's known that we're going to rely on Javon Small in the clutch, and teams do what they have to do to make sure he doesn't have the ball because there's no way to guard him one-on-one the way he's been playing. Nobody can. So, and there's a reason he's jumped from a nobody to possibly first, second round draft pick status because he's put himself there himself. And I think this is one of those games where we're going to need him to do that again. I think this is a game where, I think there's some favorable matchups for West Virginia in this game. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, I'm worried about James and everything and how he's come on because let's say he just does close to what was averaging the last few games in the game against us. Well, then you've got a totally different ball game. Now, obviously, that means other guys wouldn't have scored as many points in that game. And it's not all – you can't just say that, right? You can't say, well, I mean, if he was playing as well, it's going to be, the same. But I'm just saying, like, James is playing better now. Could be a different game.
James and the Bearcats are definitely playing better. They've won 3 of their last 4 games. And one thing that really impresses me, Paul, about Javon Small is his durability. I counted yesterday that he's played 35-plus minutes in 14 straight games. Yeah. That is really, really impressive. So
it's rare.
Not only is he a great scorer, but he's going to play a lot of minutes, which is going to give him opportunities to get shots up. Shooters keep shooting. We hear that expression, and that applies to Javon Small. Now, I want to know from you because I really, really admire the job that Darren DeVries has done this season, his first season as West Virginia head coach. I mean, you mentioned the wins over Gonzaga and Arizona, which came in the battle for Atlantis. An event where you guys played 3 straight overtime games and you won 2 of them.
Right.
So I want to take me back to when DeVries was hired and what you thought, if you liked the hire, and now that we're 25 games in to this season, what's the one thing that you like most about DeVries? Because he has completely turned the Mountaineers program around after last season, which, I mean, you and I both know that was a very difficult year for the Mountaineers. Josh Eiler did his best as well as he could. Heck, you guys almost beat us in the Big 12 tournament in the first round. So Like, take me back to when DeVries was hired to now, and what the one thing is you most like about what he's done this season.
I got a 6-second break, and I'll tell you. Stick around, guys, and I'll let you know.
Consider that a tease.
Okay, so we are back here on Locked On West Virginia with Alex Frankie Frank. The question to me is, what do I like most about Darren DeVries? That's a tough one. There's a lot of things I like about him. Let me just say that first. But if you had to tell me the number one thing, I would probably say that's the level of toughness that is required for you to play at West Virginia has not dropped a bit. It's literally the same standards as when Bob Huggins was here. Now they go about it in two different ways. Bob Huggins had the guys in the weight room, and they were big muscle bound. Think Oscar Sheboy type players, or Asaga Bakanate, like these big guys that look like they can play tight end. That's not exactly how DeVries does it, but similarly, he requires that same level of toughness. And the way he gets on the sideline, he's so animated. He gets into it with the crowd. He literally turns to the crowd multiple times a game and is firing everybody up. And, he has offered literally zero excuses as to why they have stumbled at any point in time or anything this year. As a matter of fact, after his son went out, and then Amani Hansberry went out for a little while, which was for a long time was our second best player. He wore a shirt that said no excuses, and that he didn't even say anything else about it. So I think it's just this level of toughness he's injected back into the program because we lost it there with Josh Eilert to an extent because of it was because of the players that left more so than Josh Eilert. And the portal era kind of makes it harder, but that's a long-winded say of literally everything. There's nothing I could find you that I could say I don't like about DeVries. I'm sure if I really sat and thought and nitpicked, maybe I wish he'd rested Javon Small more at times, something like that. But he doesn't have a choice. So he's done, in my opinion, the best coaching job in the Big 12. And you look at what he's got to play with here; it's literally almost nothing.
I feel like that's really interesting that people think that Javon Small should be rested more, because I think sometimes there's Wes Miller, Bearcats head coach, has been asked about this, and I've wondered sometimes why he makes the rotation adjustments and substitutions that he's made in games when maybe his best player should be playing more often. Like Jizzle James, I mean, we look at Javon Small in the minutes he's played. Well, Jizzle James in his last – in his last 12 games, so in his last 12 games, he's played 30-plus minutes just one time. And he only played 18 minutes at Central Florida. He played 27 against BYU, 28 against Utah, and then 27 again against Iowa State. So, but when we look at Javon Small, that's not even close to what he's doing. Yeah. So I think, I sometimes wonder, why – some of the best players on this team aren't playing a lot of minutes. Now, James and Dylan Mitchell were in foul trouble against Iowa State, so that had something to do with it. But it just, I don't know if Wes Miller is trying to, create a situation where he has depth to go 10, 11 deep. But I feel like now we're getting into mid-February, late February. This is where you need to, have, your 8 or 9 best players playing the whole game.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess it's just because we need him so much that sometimes in the fourth quarter, a couple games, he wasn't able to contribute because of exhaustion is my, and I think, I just worry about it for us as a team, but we're at the end of the year now. So it's you can't really do a whole lot. So let's get to this last segment point here. Keys and score, Alex. What are your keys to the game for Cincinnati here? I'll give you mine for West Virginia.
Well, for me, Cincinnati, you have to take care of the basketball, because against West Virginia, the last time they turned the ball over 14 times, and that was at Fifth Third Arena. Playing on the road, that's not going to cut it. So you have to take care of the basketball. Number 2, you got to make West Virginia shoot threes. West Virginia averages around 27 threes per game. That's a lot of threes. So if you can force the Mountaineers to shoot that number or maybe a little higher, and assuming Joseph Yusufu doesn't go 4 for 4 again from beyond the arc, you're going to have a good chance, I believe, to win this game for Cincinnati. My score prediction, I do believe Cincinnati does get the win tonight. They're in a much better place now than they were 17 days ago when they played the Mountaineers. That was an ugly game to watch, for at least for me as a Bearcats fan. And by the way, those uniforms, those Jerry West uniforms are really, really cool uniforms that you guys wore against us. So I'm going to say 69-66 in this game tonight in Morgantown. I think Cincinnati does get it done. They know their season's on the line. If you fall to 5-10 in the Big 12, which interestingly enough, Cincinnati was 5-10 last year through 16 games or 15 games, excuse me, in the Big 12. You get to 6-9, you see, okay, we have a path here. We have a path here to get back to 500. Well, I mean, you're not going to be 500 by the time you play Houston. So, but win tonight, you at least give yourself some momentum. You get a road win. You go back home for 2 home games that you should win. So I'm going to take Cincinnati to win tonight.
I can see how you might go that route. You know, I went and watched that game back again last night, and I still feel this way. I just think we're a bad, matchups are a thing in basketball. And I think that West Virginia is a tough matchup for you guys. And the reason I think that is because we have such good perimeter defenders. You know, and your defense is an elite this year. It usually is under West, but not this year, right? And I don't know what it is. That I think obviously your lack of bigs. We have the same issue. The rebounding margin, we don't win often. We won it against you guys, just barely, but we did win it. So I think it's actually tied, and I think we won the defensive rebounds by 5. So, that was an interesting game. I think for keys to the game for me, West Virginia just needs to do what they did last time, really. You were on the road and you shot 49% from the field. I'll take that. You were on the road, you made 9 threes out of 18. I'll take that. And by the way, they did it with an injured Hansberry. He wasn't really playing well. And honestly, for me, he was still coming back. And he had 11 rebounds in that game. So he really stuck his nose in there and played well with that ankle. It might have been right before the ankle. I'm trying to remember the timeline here, but I think his ankle was hurt still in that game. And then I think, the last thing I'll say is do what you've done all season long on defense, which is one of the best perimeter defensive teams in the Big 12, not Houston, obviously. That's on a whole nother level. But, I mean, you hold these guys to 31% from the field, 31% from 3. They shot well from the free throw line, but that's all they got in this game. So if you can do that, play the same level of defense at home when you're going to have the crowd behind you, I think it's going to be tough for Cincinnati to win. And then you look at all West Virginia's all-time record in the Coliseum, it's really, really good. So I think it's one of those things where it's just too much to overcome for Cincinnati. I'll be interested in watching Jizzle James early to see how Sincere Harris performs on him. Like I said, he's very used to playing the other team's best player, and has taken really good guards out of the game totally this year. And that, I mean, he literally took Nemhart totally out of the game, Hepburn almost out of the game, and others. So we'll see. Jizzle James is a great talent. Wouldn't be shocked to see him score 25. But I'm just going to believe in my guys tonight. It's going to be fun either way, Alex. Before we get off here, man, tell everybody where they can find you and what are you up to?
Yeah, and thank you, Paul. So I'm on Twitter at Frankie_Natty, currently covering the Bearcats for CLNS Media, Front Office News, Chatterbox Sports, and also covering the Kentucky Wildcats for CLNS Media and a Sea of Blue, which is Kentucky's branch for SB Nation. Also covering the Bengals for Cincy Jungle, covering the Reds, covering doing some work for the Associated Press. So Right Way Sports Network, where I write my NFL pieces. So a lot of good coverage outlets. Paul, I got to ask you, Paul, you host a Locked On West Virginia podcast. Do you have an NFL team that you root for?
Yeah, Pittsburgh.
I should have known. I should have known.
Yeah, sorry, Bengals fan.
Listen, it's interesting because ever since the Bengals won 5 playoff games in 2 years, I have come to really appreciate the Steelers and their history, which is so legendary. I mean, you go back to the 70s and the Steel Curtain, and then when I was growing up in the 2000s with Big Ben, Bill Cowher, Hines Ward, and that defense, and Palomalo, James Harrison, guys like that. So I've come to really appreciate their history, even though Bengals fans despise Pittsburgh. As you know, it's a great rivalry.
It is.
And, I mean, look, we play in the best division of football, the AFC North, and from
Has
Hard
been for a
Knocks,
while, man.
Hard Knocks confirmed that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been that way for a while. I mean, you could probably say maybe the AFC East had a chance there at certain points in time, like about 1 year here and 1 year there. But yeah, for generally speaking, I agree with you. Love the AFC North in the history. Every team is literally the other team's biggest rival that week, right? I mean,
Yeah.
You look at Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and I've always said this. It all usually revolves around Pittsburgh because they're the most storied outside of, I guess, maybe the Patriots or the Cowboys now, if you want to talk about championships, certainly, or the Niners, I guess. But, like, they're right there in the top 3 or 4 most storied, and a lot of people hate us for a reason because we won a lot, Pittsburgh, the funny story about me is the Steelers is literally the only team that I can say that I root for that's, like, won a lot. Like West Virginia's had a lot of success, but, like, not in the championship sense, And
So who else do you root for that, like, hasn't had a lot of success?
The Reds.
Oh, you are a Reds fan. Okay. So
yeah.
So you're not a Pirates fan. That's good.
No, not a Pirates fan.
What about, so you're a Steelers fan or Reds fan? Like, who are your NBA, NHL teams?
Well, in the NBA, obviously I'm wearing the Mamba hat. I was a big Kobe fan.
Okay.
And I followed his career very closely. He's my favorite player of all time. I honestly, in the NBA, is like, I'm a players guy and not a teams guy. So Nikola Jokic is my favorite player in the league right now. So we could go on and on about this forever, but we're probably going to lose my audience if we keep going.
What hockey team you root for? I know you're near the Penguins.
Yeah, I do watch the Penguins when I can, but not majorly. No, I wouldn't know much about them this year or the last couple of years because I've been so involved with this. So, but I appreciate the questions, man.
Yeah, and this has been great. I'm glad that you're building this podcast up very nicely, which I very much respect and admire. And this was a great time, and it should be a great game tonight. One thing I will say to your point about the Bearcats defense, John Newman was on last year's team. Obviously, played through his eligibility, not on this team this year. I know you mentioned our lack of bigs, and I will concur to a degree on that, but John Newman was a big part of the defense last year for Cincinnati, and he's not here this year. And so, when you don't have as versatile of a defender and rebounder as Newman, I mean, there's been more struggles than I think people may have anticipated.
Yeah, and look, here's the if you want to get to the brass tacks portion of this, one of the things there's a thing going around, and we don't have a lot of time left, but there's a thing going around. People are scared DeVries may leave to Iowa if that job opens with McCaffrey because he's from Iowa, Coach Drake, and all that. And I've said all the reasons why he won't. The one reason why he might is because they didn't get a lot of NIL support this past season. They got Tucker at a discount, and then they had to do the best they could with what they had. And I know for a fact they asked for more for one big. They needed one more big to really complete this roster, at least like they feel like they compete. I think that's the thing that we can relate to Cincinnati with is the bigs were so expensive this year. A lot of teams said, you know what? I just can't afford one or a great one. And I don't know if Cincinnati's in that boat, but we definitely are. And that's got to change going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, NIL is completely changing the game. There's
rev share is going to help, but NIL is still going to be there. Right.
Yeah. And I find it interesting. John Rothstein, you may have seen that he tweeted, I think either sometime between last night and this morning, like, you have to have NIL to be good, but it's not the only thing you need to have, which is true, but it's a big part of college athletics now, especially in college basketball. I
agree. I appreciate you guys for watching. Make sure you find Alex wherever he's at on X. Thank you guys to X on watching. We ended up getting close to 200 people in here, which is good for this time of the day at noon when almost nobody's home. Thank you guys for watching on YouTube as well. I can't thank you guys enough for helping build this channel up. Like he said, guys, you've been amazing. We had a great couple months, and let's just continue doing that. I'll see you after the game tonight as long as my internet lets me. As you guys know, after 5 o'clock, my internet goes down the drain. So for those of you asking, that's why my internet has been up and down the last few days. Is I found a pocket where I can record when nobody's home and my broadband isn't all taken up. So we'll see. They're supposed to be fixing it in the next week. So we'll see what happens there. Thank you guys for joining, and I'll see you on the next one. I think the Mountaineers are going to win, by the way, 72-65. See you tonight.